Circuit courts in Wisconsin are the trial court level courts. It's where facts are decided, sometimes by a jury or a judge, and it's the first opportunity for a judge to resolve or arbitrate legal disputes between parties. Above the circuit court judge is in Wisconsin, and we call it intermediary court of appeals, where anybody can appeal what happened at the circuit court level. And of course, then above them is the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and there's 7 justices there. The circuit courts, the trial courts, there's actually 249 in Wisconsin, circuit court judges. Some counties, actually 6 counties, share one judge, and 26 counties have only one judge for the whole county. Milwaukee has the most, they have 47 circuit court judges, and Dane County is the next largest with 17. Dane County has had circuit court judges since 1848, and I don't know if my colleagues know this, but I think Judge Trammell, who's the most recently appointed judge, is the 94th circuit court judge in the history of Dane County. Judge Mosier served for 32 years. He's got the distinction of the longest time of being a judge. So we resolve all kinds of disputes, family cases, civil being disputes between parties, like business issues or sometimes personal injury matters, any kind of contract sort of issues. Again, family cases. We have juvenile courts who help resolve matters when juveniles need some kind of intervention, sometimes protection, sometimes other intervention. And then we have criminal courts. Of the 17 branches, 7 of them do only civil and family cases. 4 do juvenile and some family cases. And then there's 6 full-time criminal branches. For the group of judges tonight, they're all 7 of 8 judges on the ballot. That's very unusual to have so many. All judges in Wisconsin are elected. Circuit court judges and court of appeals judges are elected for terms of 6 years. When a judge resigns or there's a vacancy short of the end of the 6-year term, the governor gets to appoint someone to become the judge, and then that judge runs for election at the very next April. And it just happened that Governor Evers appointed 5 new judges this past year, and each of those judges are on the ballot. And then there's 3 judges who have served earlier terms, and some of them multiple terms of 6 years. Elections are interesting, I think, for judges. We're nonpartisan, unlike other states where there's actually political parties involved in the whole process. We're not that way. We're independent, neutral, nonpartisan judges. Elections are interesting because we, are responsive to the public, and these candidates here are actually on the ballot, so they need votes. They want votes. But at the same time, part of our job is sometimes to make decisions that may not be popular. In fact, it's part of our judicial ethics that we cannot be swayed by clamor or public outrage, if you will. We just have to make the right decision, even if it's not popular. It's interesting, you hear sometimes of judges being recalled. That does happen. It happened in Dane County back in about 1976. It's an interesting story that I won't go into right now, but you can look it up. In fact, it resulted in the first woman becoming a judge in Dane County. That was Moria Krieger on a recall election. I know the Moses group and their friends that are watching this are interested very much in criminal justice reform and issues. Since I brought up the issue of recall, it's just an interesting fact. I think that I've never really heard of a judge being recalled for being overly harsh, but the public does get sort of outraged when a judge appears to have responded with a lenient sentence. That's just a note. I'm not asking for any other editorial comments on that. It's just interesting. So not all of the judges have been a criminal court judge for very long, if at all, and not all the judges will stay in criminal, but because of our responsibilities and in different ways, we all do have contact with criminal court cases and preliminary hearings and warrants and things like that. So that's my own little background introduction to the structure of circuit courts. I'll turn it back over to the group. And actually, There's one judge here. There's one judge who's not here who's on the ballot. That's Judge Jacob Frost. And Judge Frost is, I understand, with his family tonight, and there was an important family event that he needed to be with them for. But he did write a letter to the Moses group, and I think Jenna or somebody was going to read part of his letter as the kind of the first introduction of the judges on a personal level.
All right. On behalf of Judge Frost, I viewed the recording of the March 16th forum and read Moses's white paper on sentencing reform. Thank you to all the participants and those who worked to put both together. These were excellent resources. My legal background is in civil and family law, and my branch is on a civil rotation. These criminal law issues are new to me professionally, but were on my mind for their effects on our society for many years prior to becoming a judge, and remain there. As the criminal justice system so profoundly impacts the lives of those involved in it, we must continually evaluate whether Wisconsin's current approach is best to satisfy the goals of the criminal justice system, to discuss what those goals are or should be, and to discuss whether sentencing reform is necessary to better meet those goals. Our legal system is at best a work in progress. I believe most people involved in the process try to do what they believe is right and just, even if we each have our own view of what that means. I also know we can always improve, myself included. The only way meaningfully to do so, though, is through learning, reflection, and discussion. To that end, judges, legislators, and the executive branch can all benefit from hearing all perspectives and engaging in discussion of these important issues. Though events can at times make us wonder if our government is truly open to improvement, when I see citizens passionately engaged in the issues, I know hope endures that we can and will do better. To see the efforts Moses made to put this forum and the white paper together, and to hear from the presenters at the March 16th forum gave me hope. Thank you all for your drive and your efforts. A goal I hold as judge for Branch 9 is to engage with my constituents to discuss ways to improve our court system for all. In the civil law context, much of my thinking and focus is on making the court process more accessible and removing unnecessary expenses and barriers from the process. I believe the pandemic forcing us to use video technology for court proceedings demonstrated meaningful ways to make court appearances easier and less expensive, including reducing the need to miss work or find childcare to appear in court. I plan to keep exploring how to improve my practices to ensure access to the courts. I want to finish with my thanks and an invitation. Thank you, Moses, for your work in research and advocating for criminal justice reform. Thank you to all participants on the March 16th for your personal stories, research, and insights. Thank you to Moses for offering me the opportunity to be part of that discussion. Though I could not participate live, I invite anyone interested to share with me your thoughts regarding what our court system is doing well or what you believe we could do better. I want to remain a part of the solution and discussion for how to keep improving our justice system. Sincerely, Judge Jacob Frost, Dane County Circuit Court Judge.
Thank you, Jenna and Judge Frost. So next, we're going to let each of these other judges introduce themselves. It's just about 5 minutes because we have so many and we have other things we want to kind of hear from them about and some questions. So they get to choose kind of whatever they want. The first judge we're going to call on is Judge Juan Colas. He's our most senior judge in Dane County, having served for 13 years. For a long time as our presiding judge in Dane County, which is kind of an administrative role for us. He served on the Dane County Criminal Justice Council for a good number of years while that got really reinvigorated. And many of you people from Moses who've attended those meetings saw, I'm sure, met Judge Colas there. Judge Colas, you get the floor.
Thank you. And my thanks to Moses. I'm familiar with the work of Moses primarily from my work as presiding judge and being on the Criminal Justice Council. And I've always been impressed with the seriousness with which members of Moses approach the study of the criminal justice system and the perseverance that they have shown in trying to untangle the complicated issues that we're presented with. I've been a judge for 13 years, as Judge McNamara said. I was appointed by Judge Doyle in 2008. I was born in Colombia. My parents were Spanish and had happened to be emigrated from Spain to Colombia when I was born. We moved to the United States when I was 5. So my first language is Spanish. And in our family, we always spoke Spanish at home. We moved to Madison when I was 11, so I'm a longtime Madison resident. I went to undergrad and law school here. I served Governor Tony Earl as legal counsel, and then I spent 4 years as an assistant public defender in the Milwaukee Adult Trial Division. Then 16 years in the Department of Justice, half of that as director of the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, prosecuting white-collar crime, fraud by healthcare providers, and half of it in the criminal litigation unit, doing mostly commitment of sexually violent persons after their terms of incarceration. Since being a judge, I've spent most of my time in the civil and family division. We have the opportunity to rotate every couple of years. Usually that's by expression of personal preference. And I spent my first 9 years as a civil and family judge, and the last 4 years as a juvenile judge, neither of which I had ever practiced in before becoming a judge. I've not spent any time in the criminal division, but I did preside over the drug treatment court for 6 years. And as noted, I was presiding judge of Dane County, and one of my responsibilities was to represent the judiciary and the Criminal Justice Council, which is the body of elected officials in Dane County who meet regularly to try to address issues of criminal justice in Dane County. So that's a brief biography and history of my position as a judge. I love being a judge. I love juvenile work, and especially the interaction with the kids themselves when I get the chance. It's one thing I've missed with virtual hearings is that opportunity to come down from the bench and actually meet the kid and meet their family and say hello before going back on the bench and taking on the judicial role. So I look forward to having some hearings in person, though I appreciate the convenience to people in being able to appear remotely, and plan to accommodate that as much as I can. I think that's about all I've got for an introduction.
That's great. That's great. We'll save more time for questions for you, Judge Colas. Thanks. And then next, we want Judge Chris Taylor, one of our newer judges, to introduce herself. And I'll let Judge Taylor just do the whole story.
Okay, and an abbreviated, very abbreviated. Well, thank you all so much for having us. This is so important, this discussion that we're having. And I had the great privilege to work with Moses when I was in the legislature. And so I have a lot of respect for the work. I know how important the work is. It's hard work, really, challenging the power structures that we have that allow racial discrimination to continue on is a tough task, but we all have to be committed to doing it. So I really appreciate Moses and all of your work. So I am, as Judge McNamara said, a new judge. I was appointed in June of last year. I started in August of 2020. I am in the criminal division. I never practiced criminal law, so that's been definitely challenging, but I did work a lot on criminal justice issues in the legislature, which has been tremendously, tremendously helpful in giving me a perspective, I think, on things that I appreciate and things that I would like to see different, quite frankly. So I am not a native Wisconsinite. I actually grew up in Los Angeles, California. I went to college on the East Coast at the University of Pennsylvania, which is in Philadelphia. And then I came to Wisconsin for law school. I always had a knowledge and a real desire to go to law school. I had always been interested in gender issues, in gender discrimination issues, in reproductive rights. I knew from a very young age I wanted to be an attorney. That was my dream. And so I came to Wisconsin for law school and really, really loved it. Loved the commitment at that point in the early 90s to education, and loved a lot the environment and a lot of things that was going on in Wisconsin. And so really have stayed for most of my, I had a brief stint in DC, but for most of my adult life, I've lived in Wisconsin. So after law school, I practiced first with a firm called Edelman and Murray. Lynn Edelman, who's now a federal judge in Milwaukee. He was a managing partner there, a real legal visionary. He was also in the legislature, which kind of piqued my interest as well in that. And then went on to a couple different small law firms in Madison, the last one being Belisle and Robertson. With some of you might know Linda Belisle. She's been very active in our community. And then got an opportunity for what was my dream job at the time, going to work for Planned Parenthood as their legal and policy director, and got engaged and got to work on a lot of proactive reproductive health policies, in addition to really studying and learning the constitutional aspect and the legal part, because there was always a lot of lawsuits going on with Planned Parenthood. So got the opportunity to do that. And then in 2011, had a chance to run for the state legislature, which I never thought I would do in a million years if you had asked me. I was frustrated at the time. This was in April of 2011 when I ran. I didn't like what I was seeing in terms of, I had two little kids at the time. I had a baby, didn't like what I was seeing with public education and other things. And so I ran. It was a real fluke, quite frankly. Certainly it was a fluke I ran. It was probably maybe a fluke I won. I don't know, but ended up being in the legislature for 9 years and working a lot on criminal justice reform, mainly spurred by some officer involved shootings in my district that I got very involved with, trying to do some reforms concerning that issue. And it was very, very difficult. That's what I learned. I learned that when you challenge a power structure, particularly a white power structure, it's hard to, that structure is going to fight for that power. And then really my dream, I think, and something I'd always thought about, was going to the judiciary. The iconic women that I had always admired were all judges. I got to clerk for Moira Krieger, who was the first woman in Dane County who was elected to the trial court. So got that opportunity as well. So I'm thrilled to be here. I look forward to this discussion. Thank you again. And my time's up. So thank you all.
Thanks, Judge Taylor. Thank you. That's good. Next, we're going to hear from Judge Julie Genovese. Judge Genovese and I started the same year, and she's been sort of not just a colleague, but a good friend even before that, but certainly as a judge. We both work on the same floor in the courthouse, and she's been an important support for me and everything. So Judge Genovese, you get to introduce yourself.
I'm so impressed by the way Judge Taylor wrapped that up down to the second. Great job, Judge Taylor. So I want to thank first Moses for having us here to have this discussion. I always enjoy talking to community groups about what we do. I think it's really important for the judiciary to have that outreach. So a little background about me. I've been a Dane County judge for 12 years. I was elected to Lucky Branch 13 back in April 2009. I came to Wisconsin in 1987 to serve as the law clerk to the late, great Shirley Abrahamson, who we just recently lost. I was her law clerk for the 1987-1988 term. Prior to becoming a judge, I was an attorney for 20 years, practicing in the areas of civil litigation and mediation. I did a significant amount of pro bono work representing prisoners in civil rights actions, as well as nonprofits. I also taught at the UW Law School and served as a special prosecutor for the Office of Lawyer Regulation. Over the past 12 years, I've handled thousands of cases in the criminal, juvenile, civil, and family rotations. I have spent 6 years in criminal, 6 years in juvenile, and in juvenile, we also get, as Judge McNamara indicated, we get both civil and family cases. So I've presided over all kinds of cases as a circuit court judge. I've also been actively involved in initiatives to improve the court system. I spearheaded the development of a curriculum to reduce teen dating violence for youth who are under juvenile court supervision. That program is still being implemented by Briar Patch, and its focus is on healthy teen relationships. I also was involved in developing our community service program. That program, which is funded by the Dane County Board, lets people who would be sentenced to short jail sentences work off their time through participating in community service. I presided over Dane County's OWI treatment court for 2 years. I'm also an associate dean of the Judicial College, which trains new judges, and I'm currently the deputy chief of the district, which covers Dane County and 6 other counties. Most importantly, I've raised 4 children here in the Dane County community. I've been active in the schools. I was active in the neighborhood associations. I'm really honored to be able to serve the citizens of this great community for the next 6 years. So thank you.
Thank you, Judge Genovese. Judge Genovese, I think you were the chair of one of the Criminal Justice Council subcommittees that was instrumental in a co-chair in the Community of Restorative Court as that got started with a few other people, but I think that's right, Julie? Community Restorative Court?
I know I was involved, but
That's
I don't
right.
know if I was a co-chair. I can't take that credit.
All right.
But thank you.
All right. Next, we'll hear from another one of the newer judges, although Judge Mario White's not at all new to the courthouse. He actually appeared in front of me and many of us as a very accomplished trial attorney with the State Public Defender's Office. And he was so good that when he applied for a court commissioner, we quickly asked him to help as a court commissioner. And now it's great that he's a circuit court judge. So Judge White, please take the floor.
Thank you. And I want to echo my colleagues' comments and thanking Moses for having this event and for having us here. I think it's really important for the community to be able to have access to judges and also the judiciary as a whole. So I do appreciate this opportunity. I actually am not from Wisconsin. I am raised in Oklahoma. I went to Oklahoma State University and graduated with a degree in math and history. After I graduated from college, I moved to Dallas, Texas, and I lived there for about 3 years. I was a high school math teacher. And so when I came to law school in 2005, one of the things that law professors always said was, well, if you're good in math, you wouldn't be here in law school. And I'd say, well, no, I actually taught math for 3 years. So that's not always the case. I enjoyed my job as a teacher because I enjoyed working with students and being able to help people understand things that are difficult. And math is one of those subjects that I think universally people don't like. So I enjoyed teaching, but I decided that I wasn't quite ready to have a career as a teacher and I wanted to go back to school. And so that's what brought me to law school. I came to Madison and visited the school, met with some really nice people, some of whom are still long-term friends of mine to this day. Really love the city. And so that's what got me to come to school at UW. After I graduated law school, and while I was in law school, I had the opportunity to work at the Public Defender's Office in Madison as an intern. I interned in the juvenile division, so I dealt with juvenile cases. And I enjoyed that because it gave me an opportunity to work again with that age group of students, but I really wanted to have a trial experience. And so a job opened up in the adult unit, which has jury trials, and I quickly jumped on it. And so I began my career as an attorney at the Public Defender's Office here in Madison. I was there for about 10 years, just about maybe 2 or 3 months of shy of 10 years. During that time, I handled a vast array of cases, from disorderly conduct to homicide, probation revocation, everything in between, and got a real sense of what criminal justice looked like for those who are not able to afford a private attorney, and also those who are policed heavily. While I was a public defender, I was able to begin working with the Public Defender's Office in teaching and training. I've been on the faculty at the Wisconsin Public Defender Trial Skills for quite a few years now. I don't even remember when I started at this point. I've been an adjunct professor at the law school teaching trial skills. I also help coach mock trial at the law school and have been doing that for several years as well after I graduated in 2008. I attended the National Criminal Defense College in Macon, Georgia, which is a national program that is a 2-week training program for defense attorneys across the country. And the year following my attendance, I was invited to be on the faculty there. And so I've been teaching at the National Criminal Defense College, which is now in Rhode Island, since about 2017, which is a great honor for me. I've had the opportunity to train other public defenders in New Jersey, in Iowa. And so training lawyers and law students in trial advocacy has been really important to me. As Judge McNamara said, I've actually had trials in front of all 3 of the criminal judges who are here. So that's been a great pleasure. I was appointed to the bench and this past summer by Governor Evers. Right now, I handle civil cases, which includes family cases, but starting April 1st, I'll start receiving criminal cases, which I'm looking forward to, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfectly timed. I don't know if there'll be a question later, but I'd be interested, Judge White, to hear your, not asking you now, but ideas on the challenges of the public defender work locally or statewide even, and also kind of dealing with some of the criticism sometimes that public defenders have had to deal with. So think about that a little bit. I don't want to surprise you. We're next going to hear from Judge Josanne Reynolds, who's another one of our more experienced judges. She's, well, Judge Reynolds, I'll let you introduce yourself. Go ahead.
Thank you. And again, thank you to everyone at Moses for organizing not only last week's forum, but tonight's opportunity to talk to the public. My notes were a little bit different than everybody else's. I wasn't going to speak that much about myself, but more about some of the things that I've learned during my tenure on the bench. I've been on the bench, I'm in my 7th year. I've handled thousands of cases. I've ended up 5 of those years in criminal. When I took the bench, I had no experience really in criminal cases. I was told it would be 5 months and I was rotating into civil. I still have that email. It was not true. I ended up with another 2 years in criminal, which I ended up enjoying immensely. And it was a huge learning curve for me. Prior to that, I was in civil litigation in a private Madison firm for 15 years, where I became the first female partner in that firm's 25-year history. Back in the 80s, when there weren't women trial lawyers, I was trying everything. I was the prosecutor for Middleton, McFarland, and Stoughton, and I tried product liability, personal injury, construction defects, everything in the civil realm. I represented all kinds of parties and all kinds of actions. I ended up leaving my practice because I married somebody from Australia and his son was diagnosed with a very rare terminal illness, and I took a leave of absence, which we expected to be back, but I was not back until I came back here at 52 as a single mom with a 7-year-old little girl. And I rebuilt a practice at that time without a client, without an office. and ended up being appointed to the bench in 2014, and I ran unopposed in the spring 2015 election. I have found this experience extraordinarily rewarding. I have learned so much that I was ill-equipped to understand when I originally took the bench, but I had a lot of great colleagues and a lot of great resources. I have, for the last 2 years, served as the co-chair along with Representative Stubbs and DA Ishmael Azan on the Criminal Justice Council's subcommittee on racial disparities. The group has been focused on developing a new criminal justice center whose purpose is to bring together stakeholders and resources at one location. The center hopefully will ensure access to all services, including things like probation, mental health treatment, housing, employment, youth and family, pretrial services, etc. And by providing those necessary resources, I hope we can divert people away from the criminal justice system and potential incarceration. With some time on the bench now, I'm keenly aware of the challenges faced by people merely to comply with the requirements both pre and post conviction. For example, Journey Mental Health is in one area of the city, probation another, job resource center another, pretrial services is downtown. And in general, we are dealing with an already marginalized population with very real socioeconomic and transportation issues, and it becomes nearly impossible for them to comply with all the requirements. So we need to ensure access to resources if we want them to succeed while they remain in the community. My time on the bench has also brought me a lot of other awareness into the challenges faced by the people in our criminal justice system. I will discuss those as it becomes appropriate. I was intending to do so in this kind of introductory phase as opposed to a focus on myself, but I'm happy to take any questions about my background, my experience. I come from a very strong litigation background. I've been in Wisconsin since I was in kindergarten. In 7th grade, I gave a forensic speech on Clarence Darrow and knew then I wanted to be a trial attorney and ultimately a judge. And I have accomplished that life goal here today. And I'm pleased to be here and being part of this and serving the people of Dane County. Thank you.
Thanks, Judge Reynolds. I've known Judge Reynolds for many years now, but I've learned new things about her just now here. And the next two judges you're going to meet are the two newest judges in Dane County. And I know, unfortunately, very little about both of them. Because of the COVID thing, we just really haven't had a chance to get to know each other in the way that we normally would with the collegial sort of, atmosphere in our offices and courtrooms and conferring with each other. And I'm looking forward to getting to know both of these newer judges better. So of the two now, we got David Conway first. Judge Conway, go ahead.
Well, better late than never, Judge McNamara. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dave Conway. I'm the judge in Branch 17, and I had the privilege of being appointed to this position last fall by Governor Evers to replace Judge Pete Anderson. Like my colleagues, I want to start by saying thank you to Barbara Benson and Eric Howland and Fawn Bilger and the others at Moses for putting on this great two-part sentencing forum. I'm a civil litigator by background. I'm currently a civil judge, but I'm going to be transitioning into a criminal rotation starting next month. And so I found last week's program to be thought-provoking, but also really helpful as I begin to formulate my own views on these topics. So thank you, and thanks for having me tonight. So as a new Dane County judge, I thought I'd use my time this evening to tell you a little bit about my background, how I got into public service, and why I think that I'm well situated to serve our community here in Dane County as a judge. I grew up about 2 hours north of here in Wisconsin Rapids. And growing up, my late father was Wood County's only juvenile judge for 24 years. And that was really important work to him. He thought the best way he could serve the community was by helping young people lead productive lives. And to hear him speak about that role, he was really passionate about it. For him, being a judge had nothing to do with prestige. It was all about serving the community and helping people. And his example is what really elevated the notion of public service for me as something really meaningful and personally fulfilling and worthwhile. And so after I graduated from the University of Notre Dame and Marquette University Law School, I began private practice at a large firm in Washington, D.C., but I knew that I wanted to dedicate my time and efforts to public service. So about 7 years ago, I had the good fortune to be appointed by former U.S. Attorney John Beaudry to become an assistant United States attorney here in Madison, in my home district. In that office, I served in the civil division, where I became the civil healthcare fraud coordinator, kind of like the work Judge Colas did at the state. And then I eventually became the civil division chief, where I led a team of 7 attorneys, and together we were responsible for handling all aspects of civil litigation involving the federal government in Western Wisconsin. And then, as I mentioned, I had the great honor last fall to be appointed to this position by Governor Evers, where I'm currently hearing civil cases, but will soon start to hear criminal cases. So that's a little bit about my background. In terms of why I think that I'm well situated for this position, you know, I really think that the hallmark of a good judge is somebody who's genuinely interested in learning people's stories. And by that, I mean really taking the time to learn about parties, their problems, and their circumstances that led them before the court. I think it's so important because by learning people's stories and empathizing, you're going to be in a better situation to identify and prevent those subtle and not so subtle injustices that can arise. And for me, learning stories has been a big part of my life since I was young. Books and reading and storytelling have been a big part of my childhood. It's how I bonded with my family, and it's still a passion of mine as an adult. And when I was trying to decide what to do with my life, I chose the law because I knew that I wanted a career that would let me learn stories for a living. And that's really what lawyers do. And now that I'm in this position on the bench, I get to do that every day. I have the privilege of learning people's stories, and I get to go one step further and actually be a character in them and help move them towards what is hopefully a fair and constructive resolution. And that's the lens that I'm trying to look at to examine each of my cases and try to look at them as unique stories. And thinking about what we were talking about last week at the panel, you know, I think it's just easier to have empathy for someone once you learn their story. And it's easier to see that someone who commits a bad action, you know, isn't necessarily a bad person, because people commit crime for complicated personal and social reasons. And sometimes those reasons mitigate culpability, and sometimes they're beyond people's control. So I think, you know, by being able to look past, you know, someone's immediate actions to that full picture, hopefully we'll have a fairer sentencing process. And so, you know, that's a role and a responsibility that I take very seriously in this job, and I hope it's something that'll make me the kind of fair and conscientious judge that Dane County needs. So thanks again to Moses for everything over the last 2 weeks, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone else has to say tonight.
Thank you, Judge Conway. And just the last of our self-introductions is Judge Nia Trammell, and we didn't. I'm looking forward to learning more about Judge Trammell. So I'll stop talking. Go ahead, Judge.
Thank you so much, Judge McNamara. As indicated, I am Nia Trammell, and I am one of the newest appointees to the Dane County Circuit Court. I serve in Branch 6, and I am currently in the juvenile justice rotation. As I listen tonight, there are just so many things that I would echo that my colleagues have already stated. First, it's a privilege to be here, and I thank Moses for putting on the forum last week and then giving us an opportunity to share with Dane County and whoever else is watching tonight, quite frankly, more about ourselves and how we contribute to the judiciary. It was interesting for me to listen to Judge Juan Colas give his background, because I saw a lot of parallels. I myself am an immigrant to this country. My family immigrated to the United States in 1976 from Nigeria, and my native language is Igbo. And when we moved to Madison, we grew up on the north side of Madison, and subject to poverty and, you know, just very challenging upbringing initially. But my parents used education as their route to climb out of poverty. I went to West High School and eventually went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. From there, I took an interest in law and attended the University of Wisconsin Law School. I initially worked in the private sector, and I will be very frank. I think, you know, when I started out as a law student, I became a lawyer because I really wanted to be involved in causes that promoted social justice. But I ended up taking a job at one of the major law firms in Madison and worked as a commercial litigator. I did that for 9 years. And I think, you know, I always had a sense of wanting to work in social justice and just serving a higher purpose using my legal skills. So I eventually decided that I wanted to become a judge. And from there, I decided to take a position as an administrative law judge with the state of Wisconsin. I worked primarily in the workers' compensation division, and I did that for about 12 years, ultimately being promoted to the senior administrative law judge responsible for training judges. After that, I got appointed by Governor Evers through Don Krim to serve as the Deputy Secretary for the Department of Safety and Professional Services. Now, that was probably the shortest portion of my professional career. I did that for about a year and 7 months or so before being appointed by Governor Evers to the judiciary. And my appointment occurred in August of 2020, and I began serving in Branch 6 in October 11, 2020. And as I noted, I am in the juvenile justice rotation, and that was really by choice because I have a great appreciation for being able to support our youth in this community. I have been involved in a lot of different civic organizations in the Madison community that would include organizations that cater to youth. So for example, I was involved with Girls on the Run, which promotes healthy lifestyle for young girls. I also served as a Big Brother, Big Sister in the Big Brother, Big Sister program. I have served the Urban League as its president, and I was also involved with the Madison Police and Fire Commission, and also served as the president of the Equal Opportunities Commission. And so I think what that paints is a picture of someone who cares deeply about this community. And that is one of the reasons why I chose to become a judge, because I do think that judges can have a very powerful impact in the lives of people that come before them. For me, this has not been a journey of prestige or trying to make a name for myself. It really has been a journey to serve the community and to do things that end up ultimately improving our community. So it's been an extraordinary privilege for me to serve in this role, and I will be moving into the civil rotation as of August, and I've already been doing civil work, so that is my wheelhouse. I've not really had much background in criminal justice, but it is an area that I'm absolutely interested in and willing to learn and have an open mind towards. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Trammell. Thanks. That was great, but now we even get more interesting things because it's kind of a question and answer. And the point, I think, for the Moses organizers of this is to kind of blend this group of speakers with some of the speakers last week. And I withdraw now, and Fawn Bilger of Moses gets to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge McNamara. To the judges assembled, I will ask the question and then I'll call on you one by one. I'm going to mix up the order. First, I'll just start in alphabetical order this time around. The first question is very simple. I think you all are aware of the forum that happened last week on March 16th. And the question is, what was your reaction to the March 16th forum? You have 2 minutes to answer. We'll start with Judge Colas.
You're muted, Juan.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judge Colas. Did you hear the question? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not used to muting myself in court, and so when I'm muted here, I forget to undo it. I was familiar with much of the information that was presented by both professors, just from my experience on the Criminal Justice Council and interest in the area. I think the studies are very valuable. They aggregate information for us and allow us to look at a system. I think as a judge, I have to also always keep in mind the individual who's in front of me, who's before me, and their life and how my decisions impact them, how incarceration impacts them. And I thought about that as I listened to Mr. Fields. other thing that struck me is there's really no single right sentence. This isn't a formula that you can just plug in because there are competing values that we're trying to balance in sentencing. A lot of the focus in the statistics is on recidivism and the fact that longer sentences don't reduce recidivism and may increase recidivism. But sentencing also expresses some other community values. One of those is the retributive aspect of it, the punitive aspect of it, which is an expression of a community's sense and a judge's sense of the seriousness of the offense, and is sort of a response and a manifestation of that. And that also has to be taken into account. I also thought of the sentencing exercise we do at Judicial College, where we're presented with scenarios and the judges in the college do the sentencing, and we come out all over the place on how we sentence people. There's a lot of variation in what we believe an appropriate sentence is.
You are muted.
Sorry, I should keep that up. Thank you, Judge Kalas. Next, Judge Conway, what was your reaction to last week's forum?
Well, and my reaction to last week's forum was really kind of informed by my, I guess, my newness to the criminal justice system as a civil litigator. But what struck me most about the program last week was the sentencing data that was presented by Professor O'Hare. There was more data in the reading materials from Professor Klingel. And I think maybe this is an example of why making that data transparent and accessible is a good thing, because it allows the public to hold judges accountable, but it also allows judges to understand the effect that their decisions have in the aggregate, which I think can be impactful. And for me last week, I think certainly some of the data that we saw.
You're frozen.
I'll pause it. Judge Conway, your picture is frozen. Maybe you need a link. Shall we come back?
Raises really valid question.
Okay. Judge Conway, we couldn't hear you for a minute there. You said, okay.
Well, I don't, if I'm back, I don't want to, I know we're on a tight time frame, but my point ultimately was really the data struck me. And I think it raised really valid questions about whether we are incarcerating people for too long and too many people in our state, and whether we're seeing the benefits that we hope to from our prison system. And really some of the data that stuck out to me were the information that we learned about how perhaps even though we're spending $1 billion a year on our prison system, there are questions about whether it's making us safer. And in fact, there was even some data that raised questions about whether the opposite may be true. So that's information that I want to spend more time with.
Great. Thank you very much, Judge Conway.
Learn more about it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Judge Conway. Thanks very much. Next, Judge Genovese.
Yes, so I really enjoyed the presentation. I thought it was really interesting. I always think it's helpful to hear from various participants in the system. So I really enjoyed all the presenters, and then the panel afterwards with Public Defender Doral and DA Ozanne and Judge McNamara. I thought Professor O'Hare's presentation regarding the composition of our prison system and the effectiveness of doses of incarceration and supervision would be an excellent topic to bring to our judicial conference, because I mean, the fact is, as judges, I mean, we don't get that kind of information about, who is being sent to prison, how do they do when they get out, what kinds of crimes are they being sentenced for. So I thought that was really helpful, and it would be a great thing to bring to the judges on a statewide basis. I routinely hear from individuals who have been incarcerated. I'm always reaching out and listening to individuals' stories about how they responded to prison, what they feel helped them turn themselves around. So I thought that having the actual individuals who had served time in prison was really informative. I thought it was great, and I'm glad that we're having an opportunity now to sit around the Zoom world and discuss what we heard. So thank you.
Thank you, Judge Genovese. Next, Judge Reynolds. What was your reaction to last week's forum?
I echo Judge Genovese's observation. I think that this information should be shared with the judiciary at a judicial conference. And I think it's always beneficial to hear the experiences of people from different perspectives. I found the panel informative. I commend Moses for bringing that public discourse to us all live in this Zoom era. I wanted to share an experience that I think impacted me the most and colored my perspective when I began my career on the bench, which was in the fall of 2014, when Reverend G. spoke. I believe it was August 10th, 2014, which was the Sunday after the Ferguson experience. He was a guest at our church, Reverend Market Door Creek Church, and the stories, the real life experiences that Reverend G shared at that time about what he was exposed to and what he experienced as a Black clergyman here in Dane County really had a profound impact on me and on my daughter. We didn't leave when the service was over. We went up to thank Reverend G and talked about his powerful presentation. And I think in a large part, thanks to his passionate and factually accurate delivery of his experiences, I took with me to the bench an entirely different lens as I began sentencing defendants for the first time. And I credit him with that. And I think that Moses carries that forward and expands on it, but it certainly is continues to affect me today in terms of how I approach sentencing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Genovese. Next, Judge Reynolds. What's your take on last week's forum?
That was Judge Reynolds.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judge.
Nope.
I'm sorry, I skipped one.
Yep.
Judge Taylor.
There you go.
Thank you. Well, I loved it. I loved the discussion. I love the data. I want the data. I want more data. I wish I had sentencing data, honestly. I think we should be collecting that data. I'm not sure why that's not happening. So it also spurred a reflection for me as a new judge. I've been on the bench now 8 months in criminal, about, we're first to look at probation, but we load probation up with all kinds of conditions that sometimes I know the person's not going to be able to meet. And so it really it's causing me to be much more reflective, I think, on that situation as well, is the probation aspect. I will say, I always am thinking about who's not at this table, who needs to be part of the discussion. I think we are not always utilizing all the resources available in our community. I will tell you, someone just wrote to me who was in front of me in a case about a couple months ago, saying he couldn't get a job. Could I help direct him to resources? And so I know a lot of the community resources out there. I don't think we're always using those. I don't know how we're getting all that information to people. I find that I'm providing, well, call this, go to Urban League. I think we can do a better job. And I'm in the process of collating a lot of the community resources out there that I don't think we're utilizing. And then I will say, lastly, it's not, for me, getting the people who are before me, the resources they need, the care they need. A lot of people need treatment. They need addiction treatment. They need mental health treatment. They have severe trauma. The resources are there, but we have to reprioritize the resources to get the help these people need so they change behavior and so society is protected. So I think I love the conversation. We need the policymakers at the table. We need other people at the table to really initiate the change that we need, the systemic change that we need.
Thank you very much, Judge Taylor. Next, Judge Trammell.
Thank you. Yeah, so with the program last week, I found it to be very profound. As everyone has indicated, the data was really informative, and hearing the variety of perspectives was really good for me as a new judge. I think what I really took away, and I think, Judge Taylor used the perfect word, is that it really put me in a very reflective place. So in my career, as I said, I've not had much experience in the criminal justice system. However, this really opened my eyes in terms of what the challenges are and how judges can play a role and be involved in addressing some of the disparities that exist. Some of the information that I learned was not necessarily new or surprising, because we know that mass incarceration is a huge issue across the country, and Wisconsin is no exception. But what I walked away with was a desire to learn more. I want to engage more. And I particularly found the dialogue or the discourse from the individuals that were previously incarcerated really moving for me. And I really think that more of that should happen with judges, because I don't think that we are always in tune with how our decisions are impacting people. I think Judge McNamara hit the nail on the head during the discussion when he said that a lot of times judges will make a decision and they never see the litigants ever again. And so I think judges being able to hear how their decisions have impacted people definitely would make a difference in judges thinking about how they go about sentencing people and whether or not it's having the intended effect that judges were hoping for. So it was a great program, and I'm glad that I was able to be a part of it.
Thank you, Judge Trammell. Next, Judge White. What was your take on last week's forum?
Thank you. And, I approached last week because I was a public defender for a long time, for most of my legal career, with that as the lens through which I was viewing everything. And as Judge Trammell said, the information that was provided, the data, was not necessarily shocking nor surprising. It was something that I had experienced anecdotally with each case that I worked with, and the exposure I had with the criminal justice system from that aspect. But I did find not only the data, but also just the personal stories, the hearing of what happens after a defendant who was sentenced to prison walks through those doors and goes off to prison. As Judge McNamara mentioned and Judge Trammell referenced, the fact that the judges don't necessarily hear that and see that, I think is really really something that we should consider. But also, it struck me that this is an issue that is immensely complex. I think we all want that judges' decisions are going to be with a certain mathematical certainty, but that's not the case. There are a host of factors that come into play, and I think it's really important for all of us in this system to continue to talk to each other and understand what we do does have an impact, and what are the ways that we can do to not only serve the public by protection, but also make sure that we're not incarcerating people for an excessive period of time. Mass incarceration exists, and as the saying goes, if you keep doing what you've done, you're going to keep getting what you've gotten. And so clearly there is something that needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Judge White. The next question is, see if we have time for all of these questions. The next question is just a brief 1-minute answer. It's kind of yes or no, sort of. Are you willing to engage with other players in the sentencing process and members of the community to explore moderate reductions in sentence and supervision lengths. We'll use the same order. Judge Colas.
The short answer is yes. And some of that we've done on the Criminal Justice Council, not specific to sentencing, but to other aspects of it. But with one caution, which is that for
Okay.
judges,
Warm water.
sentencing has to be an individualized decision based on exercising our discretion with the facts and the law that apply. And we cannot sentence by policy. We can't say, I will always send an armed robber to prison, or I will never send a person convicted of burglary to prison. We're not allowed to do that. So that's the one sort of caution about efforts to achieve reduction in sentencing, is that it can be done, but we always have to be mindful that sentencing is an act that requires the individual exercise of discretion in a case, and that we're not allowed to do by policy.
Thank you, Judge Colas. Next, Judge Conway.
Yeah, and my short answer is yes as well. And I'd be happy to continue engaging on these subjects as I become a criminal judge. And in fact, I think, there are certain ways in which judges are limited in what they can say and do by the Code of Judicial Conduct. But within those ethical boundaries, I think we have a very important role to play in establishing a dialogue on these issues and raising public understanding of them and examining potential reforms. And so happy to continue to do that after tonight. And I'm happy to be here tonight doing that right now.
Great, thank you very much. And I apologize for my little outburst there. I was calling to a family member and I didn't realize it wasn't muted. Next, Judge Genovese.
I'm always open to meeting with members of the community to explore ways that we can keep individuals from being incarcerated. As a judge, and I think the way other people have indicated already, I need to decide each case on its merits and cannot commit to a certain position, such as a quantifiable reduction in sentencing. We don't use statistical goals in sentencing, but instead have to consider a number of factors: the seriousness of the offense, the rehabilitative needs of the offender. We need to keep in mind the severity of the crime and the wishes of the victim. I think the most important thing that we can do is provide resources so that individuals do not commit crimes in the first place. And there are numerous interventions we as a community can focus on to achieve that goal.
Thank you very much for Judge Genovese. Next, Judge Reynolds.
In my short answer, consistent with everyone else, is yes, I believe all discourse with people that have a vested interest or any interest in reform and solving the problems should be welcomed by the judiciary. With that said, I echo what Judge Colas and Judge Genovese said. There is not a formulistic approach to sentencing. Every case is heavily fact-driven, and we are required to take into consideration the standards of the seriousness of the offense, the need to protect the public, and the rehabilitative needs. We are also required to consider probation as the first alternative. With that said, I have an increasingly very low tolerance for crimes, and particularly crimes involving firearms. And I think it's growing out of control in this community and in this nation. And we'll have that discussion another time. But that is one that I believe requires some people need to be incarcerated, and that group tends to fall in that category.
Thank you, Judge Reynolds. That's an important consideration. And maybe perhaps wish to clarify the question. I don't think that Moses is asking for specific, like sentence lengths or specific numerical, like here's how the sentence should be structured, but rather exploring how we could approach sentencing differently, given the information we learned last week at the forum, and that was data-driven as well. So thank you for bringing those caveats and considerations. Next, Judge Taylor, would you care to reply?
Yes, I'm absolutely willing to engage in the discussion, but sentencing is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there is a lot that happens before sentencing in the criminal justice system that need to be addressed, quite frankly, in my opinion, to really get out the root of racial injustice. So sentencing is very important. I would love to have a conversation about a redirection or be part of a conversation of resources to make sure the people who are engaging in criminal conduct, who have the addiction, who have the mental health issue, who have the trauma, are getting those resources. So I think we need a larger discussion involving policymakers, involving those impacted at the table to get at the root of some of these issues. But I'm absolutely willing to talk about sentencing and making sure that we have the resources for the people who we encounter.
Thank you very much, Judge Taylor, and thanks for broadening the topic in that fashion too, rather than just looking narrowly at one slice. It's really part of a whole more broader process that, as you pointed out. Judge Trammell?
Absolutely, thank you. So yes, I would be willing to engage in such dialogue. And I take a similar approach to Judge Taylor. I think, for me, having served in the juvenile court, I do definitely see the benefits of exploring alternatives before you get to sentencing. And so I think it is important to take a look at resources that are available and how that can serve as an intervention and hopefully get people in a position where you don't even have to worry about reducing moderate sentences.
Thank you, Judge Trammell. Judge White.
Thank you. And as last, I'll agree with everyone. Short answer, yes. And I agree with Judge Taylor that it's important for us to not just look at sentencing, but also the whole range of activity that somebody who's in the criminal justice system is encountering each step of the way. But also, to the extent that we can have other options for sentencing, what treatment options exist, what treatment courts exist. And I'm glad that Dane County does have some very effective treatment courts that can be used to mitigate a person's potential sentence. But those are things that I think all of us are willing to talk with people about to try to see what we can do to improve upon those things. And I'm certainly one of those who would be willing to meet with people to discuss those issues.
Again, thank you. Our next question, I think we will have time for this before the end of the hour. What do you think, it's rather philosophical, but it's also practical. What do you think should be achieved by incarceration and supervision? And are you seeing the results you want? In 2 minutes or less, if you can, could you just say a word to that? Let's start with perhaps some more senior judges, if I get the order correct. Judge Colas, for example.
Well, I think what we'd like to achieve with incarceration and supervision for the individual who's been sentenced, we'd like them to have their needs met. If they need treatment, they need to have treatment. It's maybe addiction treatment, maybe trauma-based therapy of some kind, trauma-informed therapy of some kind. They may need skills, they may need education, they need changes in their thought patterns and therapy to remove some of the criminal thinking patterns that they've developed. So they should be receiving that when they're incarcerated, and they should be receiving that under supervision. To be effective, it requires a lot of resources, a lot more than we put into it. I could see in presiding over the drug treatment court, the level of intensive supervision and support that those participants receive from the Department of Corrections, with a dedicated agent assigned to that court, with case managers, all kinds of people making connections. They were receiving more intensive services than can be given to them in the current probation system. So I think that is what we need in order to keep people safe, in order to change people's lives, and to improve the community. And that's what we should be doing with incarceration and supervision. Notwithstanding the comments I made earlier about there also being an aspect of it that has to recognize the seriousness of the offense. And no, I don't see the results that I'd like to have, because there's still people out there offending, and there's still people hurt who need treatment, who need help and support.
You're
Thank
muted
you,
again.
Thank you, Judge Collason. Thank you. Next, Judge Genovese.
Well, I think that incarceration can serve a number of purposes, but I think it's important to remember that I think I speak for all the Dane County judges, that incarceration is always the last option. It's never the first option. So one of the purposes of incarceration is to protect the public. And if you have somebody who is violently offended against their spouse or against a child, we need to protect the public. There are certain crimes like repeat drunk driving, where there are mandatory minimum sentences, and repeat drunk drivers pose a risk to the community. So protection of the public is always a key consideration in incarceration. Sometimes we have offenders who have treatment needs that cannot be dealt with in the community. They are so in the grips of their addiction that they're either, committing crimes. They may not even survive it because they can't stop using. And so they pose a risk to themselves and to the community, and treatment in the community has not worked. Sometimes a prison is the best place for people who are in the grips of their drug addiction to get the treatment that they need. And we do have some really excellent drug treatment programs in the Wisconsin State Prison System. Community corrections, otherwise known as probation, is really important in terms of supervising people who can be out in the community who need treatment in the community. For instance, somebody who is a domestic violence offender can receive community-based treatment so that their family life can be improved, their relationships can be improved. Similarly, people who have drug addiction or alcohol problems can be treated in the community, but they can be held accountable through drug testing and alcohol testing. And so I do think that both incarceration and supervision serve a purpose. Now, the length of that and how effective it is, I mean, that depends on the individual and the resources. So.
Thank you, Judge Genovese. Judge Reynolds.
When I began my first 3-year stint in the criminal rotation, I thought what our prisons need to be are treatment centers and vocational training centers and mental health facilities. And we do have what's known as a challenge incarceration program and the early release program, which are programs that individuals can participate in prison and reduce their sentence by successfully completing them. I can tell you that I, like all the judges, try probation first. And in my first round in the criminal rotation, I repeatedly heard from people on probation that they'd been on the wait list for 18 months. They'd been on the wait list and their probation was up and they were still on a wait list, and they never got domestic violence treatment, or they never got anger management, or they never got involved in AODA because the wait list was too long. I had a young man in my courtroom this month who I had tried probation with repeatedly. He was an addict and had failed in my earlier round and on the criminal rotation. And lo and behold, he was back. And I had finally sent him to prison for a brief period of time, made him eligible for early earned release. And he sat in my courtroom with some new charges, and I was very disappointed to see him. And he was very happy to tell me that when he got out of prison, he was in an inpatient program. He was now clean and sober and working full time. But during his entire time in prison, he never was involved in AODA treatment. So are people getting the treatment that I want them to get when I put them on probation or in a period of incarceration briefly? No, that's the short answer, and it's an unfortunate answer. Or not always. You're muted. You're still muted.
Thank you, Judge Reynolds. and for pointing out that these results that you, whether you're seeing them or not, doesn't always rely just directly on you, all it's in, on the bench. There are so many other factors involved in the lives, in the trajectory of any defendant. And next, I will ask Judge White for your view on things.
Well, for me, I look at it, the name of the agency that supervises people is the Department of Corrections. It's not the Department of Punishment. It's not the Department of Retribution. It's the Department of Corrections. And so for me, incarceration is supposed to be a way to rehabilitate a person, to provide that person with the treatment that they need or the skills that they need, so that when they come out, they are a productive and beneficial member of society. Does that happen? I don't think it happens as much as it should. And for a lot of the reasons that my colleagues have mentioned, the resources that exist, the fact that the DLC staff is incredibly overworked, and there are just so many people on supervision and so few people that are actually able to work with them. That is an issue. And we are sort of not dealing with the root issue. And those are issues that need to be dealt with. So I think, for me, an incarceration sentence, not only do I think it's the last resort, it's actually required by law that is the last resort. But the goal of that should be to make sure that the person, when they come out, is a better person. And that leads directly into public safety, because we want people who come out to be productive members of society. When somebody goes in to an incarcerated facility, it should be for the absolute minimum period of time to achieve that goal of protecting the public, recognizing the severity of the offense, and also take into account the character of the defendant. And those are the exact, that's the word from the Supreme Court of Wisconsin, and that's what I think we need to be focusing on.
Thank you, Judge White. Judge Trammell.
I would agree with my colleagues that expressed opinions about incarceration needing to serve a rehabilitative purpose. For me, I feel that incarceration should be a last resort unless required. And then it should be something that ends up equipping people with becoming successful post-incarceration. I also think that supervision needs to foster the ongoing rehabilitative needs of individuals post-incarceration. And, I've not had much experience, again, in the criminal courts, but I can draw some parallels to the work that I do in the juvenile court. And, it's a much different philosophy in juvenile court, where there is an emphasis on trauma-informed review of cases, and then also providing services to the children that come in contact with the court. And as far as for the time that I've been on the bench dealing in the juvenile justice system, I can say that there are some children who are able to get the services they need and move on and not go down a pipeline into the adult criminal justice system. And so I do think that there's hope there. And some of those things, if they're replicated in the adult system, could be more beneficial than keeping people incarcerated and having them on extended supervision. That doesn't really serve a purpose. So
that's a useful perspective. Thank you, Judge Trammell. Judge Conway.
Yeah, and these are certainly issues that I'm still in the process of informing myself on and developing views on. But on a practical level, I certainly agree, as Judge White pointed out, and as the law says, that incarceration should be the last resort. And in terms of what we should hope to achieve with it, I think it's a blend of the objectives that my colleagues have already mentioned. I think it's stopping victimization. Keeping our community safe has got to be a really significant priority in this process. But it's got to also be a blend of providing high quality services to people who are in the criminal justice system, so that they can overcome substance abuse battles and mental health battles, and to better themselves and increase their prospects post-incarceration. And then I think it's got to be a blend of trying to limit the collateral effects of incarceration on things like the family members of people who are in prison, the communities that are disproportionately affected by incarceration, the tax dollars that we spend on our prison system. And so, you know, as I've said, I'm new to this area, but I think, you know, if we could accomplish those objectives blended together with perhaps others, we'd be on the right track. Thanks.
Thank you, Judge Conlon. Jenna, could you give me, we have a few minutes remaining. We've got only 5 minutes till the top of the hour. Could you give us a view from the Facebook Live feed and what's going on over there?
Yeah, we've had a lot of interest in the topic and many good questions. If we have time, I'll just present one question to you guys, and I put it in the chat as well. Who in the community are you listening to regarding sentencing practices? And what do advocates for the unheard need to do further to raise their voices to your attention?
Okay, we need to be really brief and succinct with this, but I'll just do a pop-up if you'd like to either raise your virtual hand or your actual hand in the window. I'll call on any of you judges to reply to that. Or should I just call on you? Judge Taylor, what would you think?
So there's not really a person that I listen to. I go to my colleagues often when I have questions about sentencing, and I do have a lot of questions about sentencing because there's such broad discretion. I can say I go back to the factors that are in the statute. Not only is confinement the last resort, but the length of confinement is supposed to be the minimum amount necessary. So the twin factors I look at in every single case, I have this discussion with every single person before me is, how do I get you what you need so you are not committing crime? And in that way, I'm protecting the community. Those two objectives are inextricably linked. So in every single case, I'm trying to figure out what is going on with this person, what do they need, and what does my community need? And a part of that is what happened with the victim as well. And what is the victim needing? So I would say, you know, I go to the statutes, I go to the case law, I go to my own experience in dealing with these issues, and I talk to my colleagues quite a bit. And I'll tell you, the professors, the people doing the research in our community are incredible resources. Professor Klingel, I've worked with her extensively on her criminal justice interests and her research. And we need to be looking, I think, using the research that's available to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Taylor. Anyone else care to take this question? Who in the community are you listening to, and what do advocates for the unheard need to do to further raise their voices to get your attention? I mean, to your. Any opinions? Jenna, is there another question that you feel is pressing?
There is. You know, carrying on from some of the advantages that did come out of the COVID pandemic and moving things remote, do you plan to continue the use of remote appearances for the convenience of defendants?
Well, I can speak a little bit to that. I think what I foresee in my court, and I'm not in a criminal branch, but in the juvenile branch, is a mixture. There will be some hearings that I will insist on the youth and the family being there, probably at the plea and the disposition hearing. There will be other types of hearings where I would be perfectly comfortable having everybody appearing remotely, such as a review hearing, 60 days after disposition to hear how things are going. We've always accommodated parents who wanted to appear by telephone. That's always been a part of the juvenile court. And so I foresee continuing to do that. And then there are some things that are just not as easily or well done in court, such as a trial with the presentation of evidence. And obviously jury trials in the adult criminal system have to be done in the courtroom.
Thank you very much, Judge Colas. We're running out of time, but I'm really grateful to you how you laid that out. And I hope that those points, we can continue to take those on and keep those in mind in the Dane County system and the judiciary and in our discussions with one another in this community. Thanks very much. So since we are close to 8 o'clock or right up on 8 o'clock, I would like to thank, on behalf of Moses, I would like to heartily thank all of you judges for your participation this evening. Thank you so much for your time and your input. And and to the over, I don't know how many people are watching online, Jenna. Did you name a figure?
We had about 40 people.
Okay, so the dozens and couple scores of people watching online, thank you also for your interest and your support. We hope that you will continue to follow Moses and to support criminal justice reform. I want to mention that the white papers that were mentioned are linked to on the Moses Madison either Facebook page or our website, mosesmadison.org. And you can look at those for some really good data, information, insights. And you can also see, if anyone hasn't yet seen the forum from last week, it's still up on Facebook for your viewing pleasure. And I would just like to say for safer, healthier communities, families, and individuals, thank you all for your interest, participation, and your energy. We now end tonight's forum. Have a good night.